Hey everybody, it's Richard Harris and Scott Leese here with another episode of the Surf and Sales podcast. We are here with a really good friend of ours, someone we both love, admire, respect, and of course he's my more handsome, thinner twin brother of another mother from another entire continent, literally. It's amazing. Matt Cameron of Sassy Sales Management. Matt, thanks for coming on.
Hey Richard, hey Scott, great to be here. Yes, another continent, another accent, here I am. And to be honest, whenever I get asked to speak at things, somebody inevitably will say, oh yeah, we're really glad to have you here. You've got a great accent. They never say, you provide really good, interesting insights. It's just the accent. So I'm pretty sure that's why I'm here. So thanks for the invite, guys. That's fantastic.
That's the best part about being an American is that we don't even know how blissfully ignorant we are.
Speaking of which, Matt is currently hanging out in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I watched an amazing speech last night from your mayor.
Yes,
we should all be so lucky.
Yeah, I'll let everybody else look that one up and no comment because I have to live here.
Yeah. So we were talking a little bit offline about how you were working at Salesforce, and I think they were around kind of 100 million ARR when you got there. But you had an interesting story, and I'd love for you to tell it again about how you kind of pushed them a little bit to start moving into some bigger deals. So that's a good place to start.
Yeah, sounds like a good idea. Yeah, and just for context for people in terms of where I'm at these days. So I started Sassy Sales Management in about 2016, which was born of that experience, I think. So for anyone who's interested, what we do is we train the go-to-market teams for SaaS companies specifically. I really enjoy it. So we don't do individual contributors, SDRs or AEs, but frontline managers, SCs like sales engineering, sales enablement, ops, all that good stuff. Because from that time back in 2005 through to when I came to the States in 2010, I just couldn't find the right sort of training I wanted for my leaders. You'd be sitting in a sales training room sitting next to somebody who's selling photocopiers. It just wasn't right. So back in 2005, I joined Salesforce when they were 100 million, so a decent sized company. But where I was in Sydney, Australia, there were very few people. I think I was employee number 6, and there was still very much an SMB focused company globally. In North America, they just started really doing quite well in enterprise. So they had large companies like Merrill Lynch joining. My boss at the time was a guy called Jim Steele, and Jim had brought his crew across from Ariba, and that crew stays together to this day. They're now over at they went from Inside Sales to Yext, and he was standing on the stock exchange podium there, ringing the bell for the second time because he was there at Salesforce as well. And they were doing well, but they needed someone in the region to help them increase their average deal size and really get into those financial institutions and whatnot. So that's why I joined. It was super exciting, and I remember, within the first couple of months, I did a deal with 80 users, which to most people listening would sound pretty small, but for us that was a big deal, and I didn't know any better. So instead of asking for monthly terms or quarterly payments, I was like, no, it's going to be annual contract, and we'll take 2 years cash up front, thanks. And everyone lost their mind. So, well, I didn't know any better. I'll just ask for it, and there you go. So
that's awesome.
So that was the early journey. And look, I was with Salesforce 5 years, and it was one of those fun times of my life. It was really amazing.
That's great. So what were you doing prior to that? Have you always been a salesperson, and did you grow up like selling baseball cards or lemonade or whatever kids were selling? Did you have business ideas all the time?
I did.
You did. Okay.
My head was just mental with ideas the whole time. I used to frustrate my friends because my way of filtering ideas was to tell everybody what they were, and with the idea that they get pushed away quickly, and it just got them out. And then if I found an idea that I was committed to, I tell as many people as I could, because I don't like to let people down. So I tell you I'm going to do something, I'm more likely to do it. So I still use that trick today. If there's something I know is going to be difficult, I'll tell it to people I care about, and it holds me accountable. So
what's
my origin sales story is a little amusing. I went and studied computer engineering, and I was no good at it because my math skills are rubbish. I moved around a lot when I was a kid. I went to 13 schools across 4
Holy
different
smokes.
continents. Yeah.
Wow.
So you miss bits, right? There are gaps in your learning, and when you go from the States to Malaysia to Australia to New Zealand, the education system's different. So my English comprehension and communication skills, got developed because they had to, but my maths was terrible. So computer engineering might not have been the smartest thing to do, and particularly then it was hardware engineering. So we're talking hardcore. So I did 2 years of it, and part-time I was at IBM as I studied to pay my way through. And my boss said to me one day, Matt, you're not a very good engineer. Or I think he said technician, not a very good technician, and you talk a lot. You should go do marketing. so I took his advice. I went and did marketing at university and got an internship with Hewlett Packard, where they paid full-time and allowed me to study while I did it for a year. And halfway through that year, I kept looking over at those sales guys who were going out for their fancy lunches and meeting lots of people and seemed like they're having a lot of fun. I was like, I want to do that. So I transitioned into it, and that was the beginning.
So Matt, go back even further though, back to these, you had these ideas as a kid. Like, what was one of your crazy ideas, if you remember off the top of your head? What was one of the ones you really just got passionate about, or even one that you were like, this is cool, but nobody else got it?
Yeah, well, a couple actually. So I'll give you a missed opportunity and the one I took that was a blow up and too early. So my missed opportunity was, I can't remember once from my kids, but once it stuck with me. When I was 21, I was at Hewlett Packard and I thought, there's a lot of good stuff I create here at work that's non-proprietary, it's not stuff that's secret, but I just like to have it. So, back then, the only way to store documents and whatnot would be to stick it on a thumb drive, USB or something like that, and take it home. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if you could just go online somewhere and stick them in some sort of repository, right?
Oh, man.
Right? But then you know what I thought, and here's my problem, because my psychographic profile, if you look at the 16 different profiles you can have, and I know, Scott, you're probably aware of most of this stuff, I'm a paranoid, which is very helpful in enterprise sales, because I always assume I'm losing, right? Until I win, I assume I'm losing.
Yeah.
Helpful. Lucky I'm optimist, so I can push through it. But anyway, so what I did was I thought of all the ways that I could get beaten. And at that time, the telcos, the AT&Ts of this world, they owned the bandwidth. So I thought, well, it's going to take a lot of bandwidth. At that time, you get charged a lot for bandwidth. I thought, if there's any measure of success, they'll just kick my ass. So I didn't do it. So that's 1994.
You talked yourself out of the cloud.
I talked myself out of Box and Dropbox in 1994. And so that's one story. And another story I think you'll find amusing is a few years later, I thought of this idea because it didn't exist in New Zealand. And essentially it's, Postmates, Grubhub, Uber Eats, but we didn't really have widespread internet use at home. So what I did was I printed a menu of 15 restaurants with a fridge magnet on the back of it. So I would go out there and I distributed all the, thousands of these things, and they cost about, I don't know, $2 or $3 to print. And then, you'd ring us up and we'd deliver your food. And it was revolutionary. It was amazing. However, what I found was that, 3 or 4 months into it, one of the kids loses the menu and you stop ordering from me. So I need to refresh, which is really expensive. So after 18 months of being a non-internet based Uber Eats or Postmates, I lost $80,000 at 25 years of age.
Oh man, that must have stung.
Oh, yeah, it did. But you know what? It didn't kill. It was really good for me because I was very humbled by it. Because until that time, professionally, I was doing great. For a 25-year-old, I was kicking ass. And
most 25-year-olds do not have 80 grand to lose. So that's one way.
Yeah, I got really lucky. I went from Hewlett Packard, and I can tell you the actual stats. I'll never forget. I was 21 years old, and I was on 21 grand a year. They offered me to stay at a marginal increase, but I got a job with a distributor of hardware for back then a company called Digital Equipment Corporation, no longer exists, and they offered me 60 grand a year, and I was like, holy crap, triple it! I'm gone. And so I didn't actually finish my degree. I went off and did that, and then two years later, I got offered a job for 90 grand a year. Like, this is amazing. So at this time, I'm like 24, 25. And then I got a job with electronic data systems. And it was my boss from the company I was with previously. It was called Wang, which again went into Chapter 11 in the States, no longer is. He and I both went there at the same time. And I think it was the best negotiation I've ever done. It was done in a airport lounge with the executive from the States. And they put me on a base of 150 with an OT of 300 at 25 in 1998.
Wow.
Wow.
Right. And so
Wow.
look, I won't claim I'm good at anything, but I reckon I can do a pretty good salary negotiation.
Yeah. I mean, where do you think that negotiation came from? Where did those skills come from? Or was it just like right place, right time? I mean, that's incredible.
I think that's always part of it, and you can't take too much credit. I think circumstance and context, being in the right place is helpful, but frankly, it's social proof, and social proof is something I keep talking to people about. It's doing the right thing is always the right thing, and build social capital with people that can be helpful for you in a genuine, empathetic way.
Yeah. Well, one of the best ways to do that, I think, right now is to actually do what you say you're going to do, which is becoming quite rare, and has maybe been rare for a while. In particular, with the kind of mass networking and brand building and everything that people are doing, it's real easy to say, let me know if I can ever be helpful to you, and then do nothing about it. It's something entirely different to, actually go the extra mile or two and find ways to be helpful to somebody, or if they specifically ask you for help, to actually deliver that particular help.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, because right now is a really good time to figure out who might be hurting and how you can help in a genuine way. So for our business, right, we do training companies. I've got a bunch of VPs that gave me early support, and put there before we were proven, right? These days it's much easier, but early on it's who the heck is this company? Who are these people? So I'll never forget that. And so, in the last 2 months, I've reached out to them with a really saying, listen, I expect that morale could be up and down depending on the context of your company. I've been through this. I was at 2000. I was selling for EDS, right? The dot bomb. We were selling to companies who relied on tech, so it was very painful. 2008, I was at Salesforce. It was very painful. So if you like, can I join a sales team meeting, and just as a help out, and I'll give you specifically the pep talk that I think your people would need, and some specific tactics and mindset that they could use to get through this. And I had a really wonderful response. And I would think of the probably 4 that I've done recently, I don't think any of them would have managers that would be sent to my training in the next 6 months, maybe never, because, I've trained all their teams already. But it's the right thing to do, and people don't forget that. Who knows, in 3 years' time, when they're in a different role, they'll forget that act of genuine kindness and empathy, right? So I think we all need to have that mindset. Don't be short-termist about what you do for people.
I think I'm doing the same thing. Like, I'm definitely offering up lunch and learns, and hey, if there's something I can do, whether even not only to old clients, but even new, right? Like, hey, just people I know from LinkedIn, or like, hey, if you need this help, let me know. I know Scott's been doing a lot of that stuff. I've had a lot of one-on-one advice. People are freaking out. Like, what do I do? I just got laid off. So I totally get it. I love that you're doing that. But I have a question. Before now, because I know you and I don't know the answer to this, but I would suspect you did stuff like this even before now. It was in your DNA. So even before COVID, how were you finding ways to add value, to give back, to create that social proof for your current clients?
Yeah, I think go back to my individual contributor selling days. I just had this mindset where I used to think about social capital in terms of debits and credits, and in a non-cynical way. I was like, the reality is we achieve things through our networks and our friends, right? And so I used to think I never want to be on the negative side of a ledger with anybody. So when I'm selling, I would always think, what's going on for that human right now? what are they thinking about day to day? And is there anything that I can do that would be genuinely useful to them? And this actually comes from the fact that the first part of my career is all enterprise. So my sales cycles, I mean real enterprise. Like at Salesforce, EDS, my sales cycles were 2 years, or 18 months minimum. The deals were no less than $20 million. And, the people would interact with would be a minimum of 15, 20 people on their side, minimum. And
Wow.
so if you're trying to build a relation, and on my side, I had a bid team that was part-time on our project, but we'd have a bid team of 12, 14, 15 people, all these different technology specialists, and we had a full-time bid manager. So if I'm going to run a relationship for 18 months to try and win a deal, sometimes there's nothing to talk about. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to become as expert I can in, for example, the upstream energy or oil industry, or one of my customers, a forestry company, and I learned thing about like the theory of constraints and supply chains and logistics. And if I saw an article that I thought was applicable to their business, I would send it to them. And this sounds simple, but I think people are lazy in general about this. They'll get something from product marketing and they'll just spray it to all their people. But I would literally handwrite a note and say, hey, I read this. Here's how I think it applies to your business and what I would think about doing if I were you. And that worked really well for me. So I did it right from day one.
And did that trigger, some interesting discussions that maybe had nothing to do with, your product or the particular sale? Just discussions about the industry and trends and what have you. And I think it's a brilliant strategy, and I agree with you that it's not being done even remotely at scale, because either people don't think about it or they're too lazy to do the work. But I can imagine that goes a really long way, in building a relationship and establishing trust and just keeping the deal, active and kind of moving forward, even if it's moving slow.
I think you can only do it at a programmatic level for SMB because you can't invest the time, right? You just don't if the transactions are too small. But at a certain size, yeah, absolutely. And people, I think of this 2x2 matrix, right? Which some will have seen because it's been around forever, where you think about on the y-axis, you've got your level of trust with an individual, and on the x-axis, you've got your level of expertise. And of course, if you're selling enterprise, you want them to really trust you and believe you know what you're talking about. Now, at that point, everyone talks about being a trusted advisor. I actually don't believe in high velocity transactional sales, that's at all relevant, right? And you're never going to build that level of relation. You don't need to.
No, you don't need to. Yeah.
No, but you need to be trustworthy to the extent that I can trust what you say to me. And I need to believe that you kind of know what you're doing, but I don't expect you to be an expert in my business. So in that context, at Hewlett Packard, EDS, even at Salesforce, because it was enterprise, you had to figure out how to be in the top right hand of that quadrant, right? Which means that you had to invest in education about your customer's business. And something that was drilled into me as a young fella was understand your customer's customer, because that's all your customer thinks about, right? So if you know your customer's customer, then you can have sensible conversations with them.
So that's really, really. Go ahead, Scott.
No, I was just going to say, your company now delivers most of the trainings in person, right?
Right.
So how are you adjusting now? Are you delivering trainings, virtually now, or are you more nurturing, current clients and deals that are in your pipeline? And how are you thinking about, prospecting right now? I'm very curious about this, because one thing that we haven't done on this particular show is talk to other people who are, I'd say in our field, right? You run your own business like I do, like Richard does, and what have you. And Richard and I have had these kind of conversations. So I'm really curious, and hopefully there's people out in the audience who are entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, whatever you want to call it. So how are you adjusting, if at all?
Yeah, well, we're completely adjusting. So my assumption was that no one would know what the heck's going on for the first 1 or 2 months. And so what I was doing early on was speaking to all of our alumni to find out and VCs and private equity firms to find out what could I share with people about expectation setting, from reductions in force, cost reduction, blah, 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 and just be helpful. And not give opinion, but give fact. Like I've spoken to the VCs, and April 15 was the deadline for many of them by which there had to be a replan. So if you're thinking about your investments and your sales cycles and whatever else, I expect things to really slow down to that point, et cetera, et cetera. So the first part was about being helpful. And in parallel to that, I was like, my expectation is that this is going to impact us for quite some time. So how do I get people to the point where they realize that a live virtual interaction can be as engaging as in person? And I knew that if I just released it immediately, it would bounce straight off people. A, because they're not thinking about it, and B, they've got other things to worry about, and B, because no one would believe that. But now here we are for many locations, we're almost 2 months into lockdown. And
people are warming up to it now a little bit.
Well, now this is the way we work, right?
That's what I mean.
They get it. So now I'm getting proactive.
The new norm.
Yeah. So yes, like in May, for example, I've got my first public frontline manager course, which we're running over 2 weeks. It's different format, So I mean, I know that people can only do 2, sometimes 3 hours live virtual before it's just too much. So I've had to reformat it and work like crazy to get that to work. But then the other thing that's really interesting, and perhaps for you two to think about as well, is I can't name them because I'm under NDA, but I had an inbound from a really impressive SaaS company brand that needs to train their manager in 3 regions around the world, in India, China, ASEAN, and they're trying to figure out how to do it. They'd normally put people in a room for a couple of days and do it, and they can't. And they knew that we did this, and so here I am. I've got one of the bigger contracts that I'll have this year that I never would have got before, because they wouldn't think to do it remote. And that's going to be the case study, the reference, and the catalyst for us now to have what is essentially a global TAM. And I never would have had that before. So, you just got to sort of, as they say in Australia and New Zealand, you got to pin your ears back, lean into the wind, and just get after it, So that's how I'm feeling right now.
It's funny because I'm seeing that too. And it's also sort of combining with what we're also seeing here in the States is that, socially, we're starting to see a lot of people say, look, I'm stir crazy. I need to do something. I need to get out of the house. The governors are making different kinds of decisions in different parts of the country and letting people sort of get back to normal. Just this week alone, I've had 3 or 4 people inquire about training, right? To your point, they needed to sort of batten down the hatches, figure out what new normal is, and now they're starting to plan ahead. Now they're starting to figure it out, and it's interesting particularly because the 3 of us work in a world of disruption, right? So many of our customers are disruptors in general, that they're being disrupted. Our industry's being disrupted, and to some extent, our current clients have been very scared and hesitant because they only know the status quo. And now there's a new status quo. Like it's just, for me, it's sort of interesting to see this parallel happening across the board in all these different places. So
I think for you guys, there's a really interesting opportunity. Sorry, Richard. I believe there's a really interesting opportunity for you guys because, I know someone who's launching a virtual onboarding next week. There'll be virtual sales kickoffs, right? And they need to inject some new energy and different perspectives. And, whereas in the past, it might not have been affordable to have you fly somewhere, to do this. And well, we can have you Zoom on in, right? In a way that's much more affordable.
I did this last year.
Not even just that, but there's also like the cost, in terms of time and energy for Richard to fly to, Serbia or whatever, right? I got it right this time. I always say something else. This fly to Serbia, right? This is a trade-off, whereas you could only do, 1 virtual sales kickoff, let's say, over the course of those, not virtual, but only 1 sales kickoff over the course of that trip. Now you could do God knows how many, right? Over the same amount of time, all scattered across the world. It's a huge difference.
Hey, Matt, just out of curiosity, because you're moving into a virtual world, right? because I think people are going to understand this. What are you changing about the way you deliver so that it becomes more impactful virtually? Right? Because I think
Yeah,
every
so
salesman would like to hear that tip. I think every manager wants to hear that. How are you doing it?
yeah, so you mean with respect to the delivery of what we do?
Well, not just that, but just sort of in the Matt Cameron way. Look, if I'm going to go on camera and try and motivate people or train
Yeah,
somebody or even have a sales call with a
okay,
customer, right?
yeah,
And now it's on Zoom
yeah.
versus what you were doing. What things are you paying attention to maybe a little differently in your video conversations than you were live? Like,
Yeah, I'm actually trying to replicate the experience live, because live I can pick up on visual cues and verbal cues to understand how I'm doing. So I'm making sure that I can still do that, right? So you'll notice now I'm looking directly at you, right? Because I've set the thing up such that I can do that. I'm also because it's virtual, I'm making sure that I don't do what we normally do on conference calls, where we just dive straight into the business, right? We just get to the point. I'm making sure that, at the start, I do what I would do in an internal meeting a little bit more, which is doing the check-in. Like, how are you showing up to this today? And I'm vulnerable with people. Say, hey, I'm ready to go, blah, blah, blah. And I'll share a little bit. And then people will share a little bit with me, which I think is helpful. And then in terms of, for you sales leaders out there, perhaps, who are trying to engage their team, with larger format meetings or whatever else, I think you can take a few cues from us. If you're fortunate enough to have a spare bedroom or some space in your house or apartment, what I've done is I've actually set up a proper studio setup with gear, so that it's not expensive at all either, by the way. So that I can literally walk around and do things. And what I've got is here's a little trick for you. I bought this thing called a puppy robot, which is a ridiculous name for a vertical projector. So I can put it right next to the wall, and it gives a 100-inch screen on the wall. So as I'm looking at you, I can see all the faces of everybody on the Zoom behind the camera. So I can look at you and I can see, hey, John, you know what I mean? It's a much better experience. They feel like I'm really engaged because I'm literally looking at your face and going, oh, John, hey, you answered it,
Yeah.
So thinking about that sort of stuff.
That's great. That's really, really interesting and really good advice there, especially for anybody
I'm literally going to Amazon right now to look for a puppy robot.
Especially for anybody who's doing these kind of things at scale and in mass. I mean, Richard and I did an event, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and there was 750 plus registrations on the event. And, on my laptop, I think I can see about 20 faces at a time is all, right? So I would have loved to have that, wall of people and whatnot, and try to make eye contact with as many people. That's great. That's a great tip.
You know what? And to go along with that, what other kinds of tools are you using? What other software are you using to try and enhance this capability, right? I think people would love to just hear, oh, that's a cool idea. What else?
Yeah. I've been sharing these out to our alumni, actually. So another one's very simple. Most people have issues with dogs and kids and lawnmowers and stuff like this. So I found Crisp with a K, K-R-I-S-P. Some people have heard about that. For me, it's been very, very effective. To get rid of background noise.
And it's like $4 a month. It's like, I emailed their CEO and I'm like, you guys are leaving so much money on the table.
Well, I'm glad I got an annual contract, because he's probably going to double it now, thanks to you, Richard.
Yeah, way to go, Richard. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's really.
I got zero response, and they just announced some partnership with somebody, and I'm like, you need to go after. They have a unique B2B and B2C play.
Richard's got some choppy audio right now.
They're early.
Try to edit.
What else?
So, what other than Crisp are you using, Matt?
So from a technology standpoint, nothing fancy. But what I will say is, if you're trying to engage your team, silly things. So for example, I'm going to grab something. what I do, and I would do this in a sales meeting if I were you, I would say, all right, team, today we've got some interaction. I'm going to ask you some questions, blah, blah, blah. And, for those of you who engage, there's a reward. And so I've got a stuffed kiwi here, which seems stupid, but you wouldn't believe how much more engagement I get because someone wants to win this kiwi.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So
I used to do something like that with these little toy cars. And we used to have like the pace car award. And you'd walk around the sales floor and these people would be displaying this tiny toy car on their desk all over the place. And some people would have a half dozen and what have you. So I love the little kiwi idea. That's great.
I've got one more thing for you. So you know how when you're in an office, you're always getting tapped on the shoulder. So something I teach SDR managers and AE managers is, look, if you just give yourself like a buffer. If you don't immediately answer a question, oftentimes they'll figure it out for themselves, right? And it helps enable them so they don't become reliant on you. So what I do is I send these out. Have you guys been to a Brazilian churrasco steakhouse before? If you eat meat,
of course, absolutely,
right.
Yeah.
Red and green. If you leave it on green, they just keep bringing, and that's
they keep bringing it, right? Yep.
Reps just keep bringing it. So what I got created was the Sassy hockey puck. There's the green. You're allowed to talk to me, but if I flip this sucker over, do not interrupt. It's silly, but it's fun and people love it, right? So little things like that, I think, are helpful.
It just worked. It just worked on me. I wanted to say something, and the red thing was staring at me, and I'm like, oh, you better not say anything right now. You got to wait till he puts the puck down. That's brilliant. I love it.
Yeah, so I would say, like, for sales leaders on the call, I can't emphasize the value of whimsy in your meetings, right? Like, I was known always as a sales leader who's pretty buttoned down, and I know I'm seen pretty casual these days, but I'd always wear a suit because I was an enterprise guy. I took, what we did very seriously. I held everyone to high standards. However, I'm human and I want people to enjoy the experience. And therefore, in the weekly team meetings, I would always have a silly theme, right? I'd start it in Australia. This is a little bit perhaps on the edge, but if there was a shark attack, which to be frank with you, isn't that uncommon in Australia? I'd have a big picture of a silly shark, and I'm this week's meeting sponsored by Chompy the Shark, or something like that. Just break it up. Don't be all data, all serious the whole time.
That's great. That's great. Well, well, you and me both. I used to be great at that stuff when I was running the team in the office and everything. Now I feel like I'm working so much. I'm just like too much of a robot sometimes, so I'm going to have to implement that feedback directly. So you just helped me out today, Matt, straight away.
What helps me? My wife is in the circus, so she got a whole bunch of friends that are in Cirque du Soleil and whatever else, and so if you hang out with them enough, these are adults who are many of them approaching 40 or just beyond 40 who are still playing like children, and it just reminds you, don't stop playing and don't start taking yourself too serious.
That's great. Well, hey, but we're almost out of time here. I gotta run. I know Richard does too. What can we do? What is there any questions that you have for us, or any way that we can add value to you and be helpful? We always try to end the show by turning it around and asking folks what we can do to be helpful, answer any questions that you have.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the big themes that I have at the moment is trying to support people think through the player-coach role. And I'm sure you see this all the time. It's a sort of a necessary evil for companies that are growing because you don't have the unit economics to do it. And then for large organizations, some people use it as sort of a development practice. You become the player-coach and then you become the leader. The one thing I would ask is that as you go around the traps and you find these people in this role, is you help leadership realize that there are certain things a player coach is good at. And remember, coach is the emphasis, right? And therefore, I'm helping you close deals. I'm helping you get better at closing deals. I'm progressing your pipeline, but I'm not HR. So I don't do firing. I don't do performance improvement plans, right? I shouldn't be having to manage up too much, all that sort of carry on. Love your perspective on that as we close out, because I just see in these times when layers of management are getting ripped out and people are, unexpectedly finding they have to lead a team, there's so much pressure, stress, and responsibility being put on their shoulders.
Yeah, I completely agree. I actually loathe the player coach model and have never put it into place when I've built and led teams, because I think it's a panacea or a band-aid to sort of say to somebody, okay, we'll kind of put you in a leadership position, but oh, by the way, you still have a huge quota and you still have the bag to carry, and that's actually what we really care about the most. And so we'll barely invest in the coaching at all, but we'll hope that this kind of keeps you on the hook, a little bit longer. So that, yeah, my perspective is just, gosh, I really would love to see leadership, not put people in that position where somebody's trying to split their role.
Yeah. All the player coach role is management, upper management, saying we don't want to spend money. That's all it is. And it's an easy thing to conceptualize, but it's not, you can't execute well on it. And if you do, you found a very, very special unicorn, not something that can scale. Right. And so for me, I when I hear it, I ask people, my first question is, great, how much time are they spending on playing versus coaching? And nobody knows how to answer the question. And then I say, then you can't tell me it's working. You can't tell me, other than the fact you just don't want to spend an extra little bit of money to hire a manager full time. Like, that's the only reason it exists. And to Scott's point, if you think you're ready to bring in a player coach, you're really ready to bring in a coach. You're just not committed to the idea of another management person. And that's the conversation I have with people, because I keep them out on it all the time.
I think in general, I agree. However, the reality is, if you're a very, very small company, unit economics don't work if you've got 2 sales reps and 1 manager. Like, you're literally, the CAC is terrible. So I think there is a time and place where it has to be a necessary evil, but you need to take away all the non-critical functions, like the reporting and the stuff that enablement or ops or someone else in the company can do, to take that away as you get through this period. And I also, to any player coach listening, I always say, look, ask your leadership what must be true before I become a pure manager. Let's set a line in the sand, because when that happens, then I dump my individual quota. And if there's no end in sight, then I wouldn't take the role.
And I actually just had a very similar conversation yesterday with one of my clients. And I was saying, you need to be explicitly clear about what the milestones are, right? It can't just be like, well, this was the CEO telling me, well, I need to have faith and see traction and see results in order to do this. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Well, I need to see growth. I'm like, well, how much growth? How many deals? How many new clients? What does your head of sales have to do very, very specifically in order to show you that, you should dump gasoline on the organization and grow. Right. So I love that, that advice that you just gave about, tell them specifically about what they need to do. That's awesome.
So we gotta stop here, but I'd love to have you come back on and let's just have an entire conversation around the player coach role. Like, I think that would be a really good, even if it's 15 or 20 minutes, I think that'd be great. I just have to jump to another Zoom and I got to use this line to do it. So
it's great talking to you. I've had fun. Thanks for having me on.
All right.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it, man.